Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I know it's the end of a very long day on a Wednesday, so thanks for bringing the brave souls that have decided to show up here today. My name's Todd Golding. I'm a senior principal solutions architect at AWS. And for the last 11 years, I've been in the cloud infrastructure, cloud application, and very much in the SaaS space during my time here. And I had a chance to see a lot of customer sort of examples and domains and so on. And I'm fortunate to be joined by Victor Rojo. Victor, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me here. Todd, speaking with you. Thanks everyone for attending this session. I'm the tech leader for the Generative AI Competency Partners Program. Sounds a little bit weird, that name, maybe the description, but it's how to bring the partners to get differentiated and be visible in AWS and its customers. Basically, I've been in almost 4 to 5 years here in AWS and 2 years in Amazon Alexa. So glad to be here, and thanks for being with us.
Excellent. Thanks, Victor. So when we look at the generative AI space and we look at the customers that we've been working with, obviously generative AI has shown up on the doorstep of a lot of organizations who are asking themselves lots of questions about how and where can they apply generative AI to their organizations. And this is a pretty broad question. They're not just looking at which products they can use and how they can drive better growth through the revenue of their products. They're asking themselves, how do we internally adopt new mechanisms? How do we create new strategies? How do we stimulate the creation of new tools and new mechanisms that bring the power of generative AI to our business and ideally drive better efficiency and drive productivity and drive a more efficient organization. On the surface, I guess that seems like a really awesome idea, and that seems like a really noble thing to go after, and lots of people are going after it, but it's also a very wide open space. And it's a very undefined space. And so what we see is when we talk to these organizations, as much as they're interested in going after these opportunities, they're still not sure where they should lean in. They see lots of potential, but they don't know how to turn that potential into the right things, or they don't know there's so much potential that they don't know how they should pick and choose where the right places are in their organization to do this. And now I'd love to tell you that there's some blueprint for how to address all this, or there's some methodology that we've come up with, or based on our experiences at Amazon and AWS, we've solved some part of this, and I could give you a white paper to walk away with that would tell you how to distill this problem and find the right opportunities. The truth is, it's still a very much a wide open space and an evolving space. At the same time, there are patterns. There are things we see people doing. There are strategies Amazon and AWS are using to sort of harness the power of generative AI and really create new tools, new mechanisms that are driving the business. So my hope today, at least here with Victor and I, is to at least bring some additional structure to that and give some framework to what it is that you can do to try to think about how and where to apply generative AI in your organizations, and also look at some of the examples of what we're doing at AWS and at Amazon in general, with the idea that maybe at least you can leave here, see the sort of the landscape of possibilities, and go back and then figure out how and where this might fit for your organization. There will be no magic bullet in here, though, right? There's nothing that is going to be the one takeaway that tells you all how to succeed here. Again, if we just give you enough of guardrails and enough insight here, hopefully it'll sort of stimulate the adoption of these ideas inside your organization. Now, I will say, part of the challenge here is organizations are wandering into this space and they're starting to figure out where and how do we apply generative AI. There are often so many questions organizations are asking themselves across all kinds of areas of their business. They're thinking about what's the operational sort of model for this? How would we operationalize this? How would we think about responsible AI? How would we think about what kind of data we are allowed to participate in the tools and the mechanisms that we're building? That alone at AWS is a huge discussion of just where, even if we're going to go build a tool and we see all these possibilities, what does it mean to operationalize it? What does it mean to secure it? What does it mean to create the right experience? Or people are asking themselves, like, how will this affect the cost of their business? And if we go after these generative AI mechanisms, will they affect the bottom line, or will they bring a lot of expense to the company? The truth is that there's just a really wide set of questions, and it's because adopting this approach is very much a holistic experience for organization. It isn't about spinning up a couple tiger teams and asking them, hey, go play around with this generative AI stuff and go figure out how and where we should use it. It's really something you're trying to inspire and instill into the culture of your organization. You want people in your organization to be asking themselves, where are the opportunities to bring generative AI to their environments? How do we inspire that in them to get them to come back to us with new strategies and new approaches and new mechanisms, new tools that can drive these efficiencies? And so for me, I feel like you have to look at the people dimension of this problem, you have to look at the organizational dimension of this problem, and then you have to look at just the bottom line sort of version of this problem. And so, so for me, what I'd like to think is that, can we put some guardrails around this that sort of promote innovation, but also make sure we're focusing on those areas that are going to drive the greatest business impact for the organization? Because to me, it's really easy to just spin a whole bunch of people in a whole bunch of different directions and spin up all these different projects and have none of them actually end up going and being deployed and being applied universally across your organization. So you spent a lot of time, but you didn't get a lot of return on the effort and the energy that you put into it. So now if you said, like, where are the common buckets? And many of you may already be familiar with these use cases, but if you asked me, like, when I see inside AWS and inside Amazon, and when I see inside of other organizations, where are the sweet spots, where's the opportunities, and where should you be looking? Certainly, we have this spectrum of possibilities here that I think at least represents some of the common buckets. If we work this left to right, you'll see that I have customer experience here, and this is where I think as generative AI showed up on the market, we saw the chatbot and the chatbots being applied, virtual assistants being applied to any and every problem we could, because that was the thing we most understood as an organization. But the reality is these chatbots, these virtual assistants, if we look beyond the basic things they can do, they can really be applied both internally and externally in ways that drive better outcomes for your business. Certainly the external one's the one we know most because we probably interact with those bots ourselves. How do I create a better customer experience? How do I help people with support? Things of that nature. But what sometimes gets left out of that discussion is, how can I create internal chatbots, virtual assistants, mechanisms that will take processes and mechanisms that are inside my organization, and bring the context of some business problem to a chatbot that drives more efficiency in your organization, gets employees, gets them answers, gets people more connected to the contextual information they need at a faster pace. And so this is where you could see my IT department has a chatbot, and I can go and say, oh, here are common problems. It has been laced with all the issues that are just not sort of historical, but are also emerging. And can somebody go there quicker and get an answer than having to wait for somebody to call them back, and so on? And can we use that to drive efficiency? Same thing with HR, same thing with other departments. There are ways here to bring chatbots to this experience. And I think it's the one a lot of people have started with. And I think there's lots of tools that have been introduced here to try to accelerate this space. The middle one is employee productivity. I actually feel like this is the area I've seen most of the effort and energy being poured in, right? We have in our companies data all across our company that are part of processes and mechanisms. It's often very distributed across the company, and the processes and the mechanisms that we're using today are often really good candidates for saying how and where could generative AI take those processes and mechanisms and make them a richer experience. More importantly, can they make it a more efficient process? Can we take things today that take a very long time, that have to pull data from all around our organization, and they have lots of overhead attached to them, and can we reduce the overhead of that substantially? This is, in fact, we'll see an AWS example of where we've done this internally. And in fact, I would say if you looked at the sweet spot of a lot of the tools we build inside, people are looking across sales, they're looking across all the different departments in our organization, looking at the classic tools that are there and asking ourselves how and where we could enhance productivity in the areas where we can drive the most value. So we aren't just sort of randomly going after anything and everything. We're still asking ourselves if this business process or if this productivity area were enhanced, it's enhanced in a way that it moves the needle for the business. It's not just a better way to solve the problem. It's a way that solves the problem that has a real impact to the bottom line for the business. And obviously in this productivity area is code generation, right? I've sort of lumped two things together under this. There's classic sort of productivity tools and other mechanisms, but also in here is code generation. So it's here that we see the builders and the developers and the technical side of our business leaning in with tools and putting tools like Amazon Q, a developer, in their back pocket and other things to generate and build systems at a faster pace and build higher quality systems and deal with a lot of the sort of mundane tasks that are often associated with building here as well and generally increase their productivity. And then the last area here, business processes. This you could connect this to productivity if you wanted to, but you can imagine there are quality control mechanisms. There might be inspection mechanisms that you have in your organization that are these well-defined processes. And the question is, are some of these processes candidates for generative AI? Can we look at some of those and say, hey, we have this quality control process in our organization. Today it takes X number of people to do this, and it takes them X number of hours to complete this kind of task. Or even there's some machine that completes that task today, but it still takes X amount of time to do that. Is there a way I could bring generative AI to that particular process and not just make it a more efficient process that impacts the business, potentially enrich that process in ways as well? Because I think sometimes we're only looking at speed and dollars as an outcome. Sometimes it's also that innovation comes out of looking at these processes and people find new and better ways to solve problems. In fact, I think innovation is the tricky part of this, which is there's the low-hanging fruit of the things you know you might go after, but then there's also where are there places where generative AI is a use case that it isn't on your radar, it isn't one you're thinking about. It's one that somebody sitting in some corner of your building has on their mind but isn't talking about. And how can we tease those out of the business as well? I think that's an essential thing.
Todd, I wanted to add to the previous slide also to consider the industry-specific use cases. As you can see, there are use cases that are multi-industry, but also think about those use cases that are specific for healthcare, telco, energy, and all the industries that maybe you are part of or that you are working actually with customers.
Perfect. Good call out there. Now, the challenge to me of this is, great, there's all these different use cases, there's all the different opportunities out there. How do I decide which ones to go after? And this is where I feel like there is sort of classic business process that's here that comes to our rescue here, which is, in general, at least at AWS, right? We've always been very data-driven about how we choose where we invest and what things we're going to put our time into, and we work very hard to figure out and ask questions about how the things that we're working on are going to actually correlate to a business impact, and how can we quantify that business impact, and how can we use that to make good decisions about where we spend our time? Because in this space, there will be no shortage of ideas and opportunities and places to go after. So then you have to figure out what sort of mechanisms are you going to put in your place? What data can you get? What information can you get to look across the entire spectrum and the portfolio of opportunities and decide how are we going to pick and choose the ones that are right for our organization? And how can we, in a quantitative way, ask ourselves, is this the right one to go after? And then you'll see here on the left-hand side, then this is our classic sort of flywheel sort of story that we always tell here, which is even as you get into the space and you pick items, this is still about it being a data-driven environment, which is we experiment, especially in the Gen AI space. We experiment because a lot of times we're creating something new, then we're not sure exactly how or if it's going to work the way we expect. We look at it, we get feedback on it, we use the data from that sort of feeds back into the cycle, and we refine and build. And if something's not working, we try to use that data quickly to decide whether we should continue to go forward. The hard part of this is, again, where do we experiment, where do we innovate? And how much experimentation, how much innovation should be on our radar, right? Is there some threshold at which we are too heavily in the experimentation and the innovation space? You have to find out where that boundary is. Some organizations are just saying, go ahead, innovate, because we're so open to trying to find these innovations that we're willing to let lots of the organization find out how and where Gen AI is at. Others are more compartmentalized about that and saying how and where do we put some guardrails around that to be sure we're spending our time productively. Now, in terms of bringing more structure and discipline to this, we'd also want to bring classic sort of mechanisms here in terms of just looking at how or if the opportunity we're looking at with generative AI is really a viable opportunity, right? Simple questions like, what kind of budget's it going to require, right? Do we even have the right people to work on this? A really key question here, do we have the right data to go after this space? Because in the Gen AI space, there's lots of really key questions about the data. What risks are here that we should be thinking about? And to me, the risks here in the Gen AI space go beyond the classic sort of business risks. We have to consider what are the broader implications of using Gen AI for this problem. But really, the bottom left corner is ultimately what all these decisions typically come back to, which is, what's the ROI of this? And I could have taken this and presented this in the context of pretty much any business decision. My key is that you want to bring this discipline to your portfolio of internal opportunities that you're looking at to figure out how and where you're going to use generative AI in your organization. The other piece of this, and this is where there's some structure, if you've seen our cloud adoption framework, there's this general framework and there's documentation and bits you can find on the AWS websites about cloud adoption. And what's nice here is as part of this framework, there are AI foundation capabilities. So they've taken the sort of the fundamentals of the adoption framework and say, now what's the Gen AI overlay of that experience? So what does Gen AI do to the governance profile of our business? What does it do to the security profile of our business? How is it going to affect the operations story? And I think this is the area where some organizations are sort of overlooking the potential impact here of adopting and going after these tools, right? Because sometimes if you're going to adopt these tools, what guardrails are you going to have in place? What is your story around responsible AI? Who's going to own some of these things? And what is our governance story around this? So I would encourage you to go look at the AI Foundation capabilities, because I do believe it gives you some more structure about how to sort of put the moving parts of the whole experience and weave that into your business. I did want to just call out a few examples here that are examples of things Amazon has built with generative AI. There's this Rufus, which is the shopping assistant that we see, and we'll dig into a little bit more of that. We've built this pharmacy solution. We found a place where we can introduce generative AI into pharmacy, where it's both making the sort of the process of filling your prescription better, but it's also bringing support. And you can imagine questions and feedback and information people need as part of thinking about getting their prescription or getting a drug. And then one that I think is sort of one of the most obvious spaces to go after. There's always been sort of creativity and imagery, and video is an area that is really obviously right in the sweet spot of generative AI. And what we see is Amazon is bringing that to the ads space as well, and seeing that that's having a pretty significant impact, right? So if we look at Rufus, the thing I think is interesting about Rufus is, and some of the other apps that fit in this space, is that we're not just we're moving away from the chatbot sort of this, right? We're going to take the data we have behind the scenes, we're going to take the context we have behind the scenes and use generative AI to enrich your shopping experience. But it's not enriching it in a way that we just type in prompts and we drive prompts and we get responses, right? No, we're using this as something that's more baked into the overall shopping experience, and under the hood of all this, leveraging the power of generative AI to make this work. So you'll see this for comparing products and customer reviews and all kinds of other ways that it's influencing the shopping experience. And I think the takeaway for me there is, even if you're not building a shopping experience, like how and where can you weave generative AI into your solutions in a way that moves the needle for your customers, but maybe doesn't rely on them to know anything about the fact that they're interacting with generative AI. On the ad side of this, there's just generally the sentiment. You'll see 89% of consumers generally want to see more videos. They want to see more imagery in general as part of their ad experience, and richer experience here. And here, using generative AI and in the ad space to generate imagery that drives a more successful ad campaign, or videos that drive a more successful ad campaign, has been super effective for Amazon. And you can see down here in the bottom left corner, we get this higher click-through rate when we've used this imagery here. So the imagery isn't just about productivity. It's certainly helpful that for a lower cost, we can potentially generate more images and more videos, but we're also moving the needle. There's a measure on the other side of this, like, is it affecting the bottom line? Is it moving the needle for the business? And in this case, it is. Okay, so that's like the foundation. That's the bit of like how and where do we think about sort of identifying where the opportunities are. But I really wanted to dig a little bit more into what does it mean to enable productivity, because I feel like productivity is one of the sweet spots of generative AI, and one where I feel like if I were going back and I were taking this information back with me, how and where would I be able to apply some of these concepts? And if you just look at what Amazon brings to this story, and you look at what Q brings to this, we really bring two very distinct flavors of driving productivity, or two distinct tools here that can drive productivity. On the left-hand side, you'll see Q Developer here, and obviously in the developer world, this is more about sitting right in the tool bag of the builders in your organization. So if I'm in the development environment of my organization, and I've got the tools that I use, the idea is to bring Q Developer into that experience and set it aside their experience and let it be a tool that helps them write the code of their actual solution, or introduce unit tests into their system, or basically handle a wide range of tasks, including modernizing code and a wide range of things. And you can imagine the sweet spot of this is more about how do I get my builders in my organization to think about putting Q more in their tool bag, right? Because I think that there's always a cultural challenge here, which is with developers especially, that's my orientation, we get very comfortable with a set of tools, and it takes a lot of work sometimes to get people to say, we think we can get better productivity if you start looking at how and where you can introduce Q into that experience. On the other side of this is Q Business. And obviously in this model, it's more about saying, how can I make this a lower friction experience for somebody? How can I take the employees in my organization? How can I take the data that's in my organization? How can I bring it all together in a way that doesn't require a lot of effort, energy, or a lot of technology people to make all that work? And then build these contextual views of this data for my organization, and then let analysts and let other roles within your organization interact with that data to answer key questions about problems they're solving, or make processes work better, or whatever contextual sort of thing you want to do for this. So for me, these are two very distinctly different halves of the experience, and they both represent areas where you want to drive productivity in your organization. Now, if we look at what it would mean to go back to an organization and say, well, where and how would I go after these opportunities? To me, I've got these internal consumers of data. I've got all this corporate data that's spread across all the different systems in my environment that have a lot of context in them, but they're highly disjointed and highly separated. And so when I think about how and where I can enrich business processes and overcome some of the challenges and some of the friction that exist in those environments today, to me, it's about asking ourselves, well, okay, which data do we need to solve this problem, and where are the opportunities for productivity tools to sit in this space and build experiences around that data that would either create something new that we've innovated and created on our own, or take something existing and make it better. And I just threw a handful of examples in here because we see generative AI and teams basically assembling these views of data and attaching it to processes, and then coming up with all kinds of creative ways to go after things that, like I put employee reviews here, there's an internal process here where we see lots of people who are saying, well, just as part of the end of the year, there's all these things we have to do as part of the mechanized part of preparing reviews. Is there something we can do with generative AI in that process that would reduce the effort and the energy that all these managers or people within the organization are having to do this? Same example with automated support I mentioned earlier, and then document review. Maybe we have some organizations say every document that goes through our organization that's of a certain type must always go through this type of inspection. Can we grab that data? Can we grab the rules and the guidance around this and apply generative AI to this? And if you look at an example of this, AWS has this sales effectiveness tool, right? And we have these summaries that were being previously sort of assembled by people to do these account summaries to really help other people get a clear capsule view of what's going on with a specific company. The effort and the energy to pull these together, to assemble them, and these tools, by the way, were super important to the context of working with an account. We found that this was a sweet spot for going after for improving productivity, partly because we do so much of it. That's one of the criteria we certainly want to go after here. We repeat this over and over again, and the overhead of doing it is high, right? So it sort of checks some of the boxes here in terms of asking ourselves, is it a good candidate? And you can see here, this was a 35-minute average savings of time here. We've done it across 125,000 summaries, and overall, the net effect of having done this has had a pretty positive effect to the business. So this is just one example of one of those productivity tools that might have landed in that box, and now becomes the job of the people in your organization to figure out how and where are these opportunities sitting, and where can you go after them. The other thing here is to have a bit of a playground approach to this also, which is to say, where can we just have people think of brand new things we never thought of? Like, there are tools and mechanisms that have been created at AWS and at Amazon that are things nobody thought was a problem, but somebody went off and created a really cool app based on generative AI that suddenly became a tool that was super valuable to everyone in the organization, right? So here you might say, some internal builders are gonna go away, and based on their own sort of energy, enthusiasm, and desire for innovation, and maybe a little bit of guidance, have gone away and said, I created a team analytics tool. I've got this deal analytics app now that's built on generative AI that lets us see and understand things about our deals that we didn't know about. Or I've got some branding tools, like we have to produce all this marketing materials, or this is where the imagery could come into us, or we're making PowerPoint templates for reInvent, and they all need to conform to some model, and kind of how can I make it better for that. Social posts is I know people have made tools for, like, how can I make a social post for social media a better branded experience, and standardize that in a way that people aren't off figuring out on their own how to piece together all the pieces to make something look nice. For me, this is just the big unknown part of this. I can't give any good guidance really here around saying exactly where or when you go after these. It's more like, are there people in your organization who are looking for these kind of opportunities and finding things you didn't expect they would find? The other one, the developer side of this, is a lot more straightforward, right? For those people from the build sort of world, they're sort of very familiar with this idea of how can I bring a tool in, and it's a very text-driven thing in a lot of cases. Like, how can I ask it to go write an algorithm for me to do X or Y, and it generates the code for me to do that, or how to go refactor this piece of code, or convert it from Java, an old version of Java, to the new version of Java, right? But what some people don't think about here is that this can actually touch the entire life cycle of the development process. It can touch planning, it can touch operations, it can touch the security profile of this. Lots of these mechanisms that often go overlooked in some organizations or get minimized in some organizations. Now you can bring more rigor to the security, the unit tests, and all the other bits that are part of this whole life cycle, and really make development not just a more efficient process, it can yield a higher quality product. And if you look at where is sort of on this development story, where do we hit, right? You can obviously see, like, just intent, we can apply a Q developer to this whole area of just modernization and retiring technical debt, and really bringing more acceleration to how we modernize solutions. You can see this just across developer productivity. How do we diagnose problems? How do we write unit tests? And then, just like I mentioned here, this is a bit repetitive maybe, but where do we go after security and code quality? Like, these are like low-hanging fruit opportunities for me. And then last, I would just say, I would look across these two realms. If we look at product and solution productivity, like we're building products, and how do we bring Gen AI to that piece of the world? And then how do we look at internal value? How do we look at how we can drive productivity internally? You should be looking across these two domains and asking yourself how and where there's opportunities for you to drop in and drive value in an organization. So at this point, Victor, I'm going to hand over to you. I'll give you
Thank you.
Colin, and you can go from here.
Yes, just to remind you, in the next topic, which is related to data-driven specialization, why we are talking about this? Who is proud of your existing data strategy? around generative AI. Maybe at this moment there's more for reporting, maybe for data and analytics, but what about preparation of data to connect it with generative AI? How to gather this data, to integrate it with your models, and also to provide more intelligence to these models, to your users, to your customers. How many of you are here customers? Who are customers of AWS? And who are partners so far? Okay. And you are delivering already generative AI solutions, and when you connect with a customer, and as a customer, you realize that you need data. So it's important to gather this data, to integrate it, and to use it to provide a more consistent and more contextualized solution to, or answers to your users. This is super simple. We've seen this type of solutions or patterns already existing everywhere. We are talking about RAG initially. Maybe many of you are already moving away from prompt engineering out of the box. I call it zero-shot prompt engineering to be more proper. Then you move to few shot already. And all others are already using RAG, are implementing RAG patterns in its different variations. There are, how many types of RAG implementations and patterns do you already know? That's important. But the most important part that we can see here from this slide is the context. The mix of, there's no secret in here. You can see that the secret sauce at some point, it's the mix of good prompt engineering, the context, which is the data, and a foundation model. And I dare to tell you that not necessarily now it's a foundation model. Todd mentioned Amazon Q, for example. It's a technology. You don't need to fine-tune a model. You need to connect it with a data source. And you say, hey, I don't have connection with this data source or this other. How do I make sure that that's possible to do it? So data is the differentiator. Here, once connected with the model and with the good prompt that you are providing to this model, then you can get more in-context answers, more connected with the branding that you have. For example, in other certain projects that I was participating, the customer used to tell me, this is not the way that we connect with our customers. Okay, we need your data to understand better maybe what are the phrases, what is the type of branding guidelines that you have to customize more the answer that we are bringing to the customers for these models. And here is where you can see different models, variety, for example, Titan, Claude, Jurassic. Did you hear today about, or yesterday maybe, about the new models that AWS is releasing and announcing? You have a variety there of models. And also you have different levels of integration of this data, which is in the next slide. In the next slide, you can ask yourself, how do I, after I gathered the information, the data, that I know where it is coming from, how do I connect it with the model? And here is different stages and also different levels of complexity. This slide is not just to tell you, this is complex, this is easy, this is how you can do it or not. This to verify with you as a customer and also as a partner with your customers to understand what is, I call it just enough Gen AI or customization. Because maybe initially you heard or you read that the best experience is training your own model. But how many of you are training your own models? No one? Okay, who is doing continued pre-training or fine-tuning so far? Oh, that's good. Okay, and who is implementing RAG? Okay, I will ask also, who is doing pure prompt engineering? Prompt engineering is not saying you are basic, nothing like that, but who is implementing few-shot prompting, maybe all the variations, because one thing is prompt, the other is how to fine-tune those prompts, which we call prompt engineering. Who is doing more prompt engineering so far to customize the solutions? Makes sense, totally. And here you can see with RAG, we are bringing this data to expand the knowledge or augment the knowledge of the model, which basically like in a test with open book and start telling the model. And at the same time to verify that there are no hallucinations, of course. With fine-tuning and continued pre-training, the difference here is that there's labeled, unlabeled, structure, unstructured. You can see this in Bedrock. And train your own model, well, there's a lot of sessions, I think, this week that maybe you already attended, or previous sessions or other white papers and a blog post that we publish about how to train your own model. But here I can expand you again in this way, that thinking about if we need a model, if we need Amazon Q, which is not a model, it's just at some point consumption and connection with data sources, or going deeper through the level of using SageMaker, or going beyond that and using maybe a cluster on top of EKS to train and to deliver inference through these different patterns and solutions that AWS is bringing to the table. And this will lead us to something interesting here. I will ask you a little bit about this. Think about three different customers connecting to a certain e-commerce platform. Guess what platform? Think about the name. Doesn't have to be Amazon. And they ask certain question. For example, the golf sports user is asking, show me tools or accessories to improve my swing, for example. The tools domain is asking about DIY project tools or something that needs to fix at home. And the closest domain maybe is asking about the latest and greatest, I don't know, certain brand shoes or accessories. In this e-commerce solution, initially we can connect Amazon Bedrock with information that we gathered previously from these customers, profiles. What information can you bring from the customer that you have at this moment? It could be profiles, it could be interactions, it could be chatbots, conversations, it could be orders, tickets, etc., PII, demographics that can be there, or depending the context, it could be even healthcare information, for example. And based on this information, we try to bring a customized answer to this user. That is like the contextual response that we can see here. But how many of you are using already agents? And are you building your own tools or to do everything inside, or are you connecting them and providing the tools to connect with external data sources? For example, the simplest one that comes to my mind, for example, it's connecting this agent with a tool that queries the weather for this user that is trying to improve their golf swing. I tried, but I'm not the best player for golf. So imagine a solution that in terms of context can bring accessories, can bring maybe suggestions of different clubs for improving that level of golf and performance that this player has, but also make recommendations based on the weather in the forecast that was queried for maybe 2 weeks ahead or 1 week ahead. And maybe part of those recommendations are related to inside golf simulator or other suggestions that can bring to the table in this case. It's what could happen. And the other aspect that I want to ask you is, what do you believe that has more power? A good experience or a bad experience? Think about this. A good experience can lead a customer to be loyal to our brand most of the time. And if we improve more that experience, can lead that customer to spend more on our brand. But one bad experience will lead that customer to evaluate if he continues with us, or if he or she or they will switch to another company. So this is super important. There are multiple statistics about this. I'm talking to you about a survey that my team did in the conversational AI space 2 years ago. And most of the customers, they say, I would switch if that company doesn't provide what I'm looking for or I got a bad experience, almost immediately. And you also know about the power of word of mouth. So imagine that. So it's a chain of different situations if we don't provide the best customer experience, and Gen AI with Amazon Bedrock and other services are here for helping. We also need to mention this as part of the data integrations, building a data community. I think it's one of the most representative aspects of people, technology, and processes, because we have different players here. If you can see, we have producers, which is all of those domain-specific knowledge that exist in the company. Think about those different lines of business that exist and that they are experts in that area, but they aren't technology experts. So they have that information, and in the technology side, we have engineers, machine learning engineers, data scientists, security, all the team that, and I include myself, that we are doing that curation of that information, making sure that the access is defined as according to the classifications that were defined by the security team, for example, the different levels of confidentiality that the company has. All those measures are in the technology side because the producers, they don't have that knowledge, but it's highly valuable what they bring. And they want to share this information with consumers. And the consumers is not only humans, are systems that we have here. But the idea in this data community, and you can search for that in your searches that you do after this session, building a data community, and you will find out that ebook that talks about this pattern. The idea here is to harmonize the interaction between producers and consumers, and using the technology as that instrument to do that integration between these two worlds that we can see here. And the other aspect is related to, okay, everything looks good, data looks good, I deployed, or I'm thinking about moving from an experiment to production. So what is important here to consider? And we call it operationalizing generative AI. Governance and compliance. It's one of the steps that everybody thinks about that, but not all the time implement. But the important aspect here is defining and making sure that the organization and all the involved stakeholders, they are generative AI fluent. And they know the limitations, they know the advantages, and they know also the power of generative AI in the context where they are working. The other aspects is related to the definition of validations or implementation of guardrails, basically. If we just trust but don't verify, so it will be a little bit difficult to get trust from our consumers that normally are external consumers, or internally, maybe for reporting or those different business areas that Todd mentioned, they will not trust these generative AI-based systems. In the other side, you can take here the rest of the bullets that are related to monitoring once we are deploying this into production, understanding that this data that we are using is coming from certain origins, all the lineage of this data, to understand who are the owners and the levels of quality that we are expecting. And finally, regulations. Maybe you are working for a highly regulated industry, but sometimes even though you aren't regulated in a highly regulated industry or environment, you need to comply with certain requirements that will make more organized the company. And sometimes we are asked, okay, this looks good in paper. What services or solutions do you have in place for implementation of responsible AI? Maybe in other sessions, you already saw certain patterns that apply to how we implement these different practices. Here we mentioned different services that could be helpful for the implementation or start exploring what is responsible AI. Different aspects that you can see here is discoverability and transparency. We are using AWS AI service cards or model cards outside of the AWS world, where you can understand the biases that the model has, many details about origins of the data, how this model was trained, maybe confidentiality of the information, origins, what else, certain levels of accuracy, or where the model excels and where the model is not the best. You can find out at certain levels of transparency that many providers are doing. DataZone is a platform that helps not only for transparency and discoverability of data, also for governance. And you can see other tools and solutions that appear here. For example, guardrails and watermarking for Amazon Titan that helps to increase the trust of your customers on the content that you are generating, and also helps you to validate what the customers that are interacting with your solutions are getting and trying to tweak maybe in your solution. I guess you've heard previously or several months ago about the General Motors guy that bought for $1 one SUV, and there were no guardrails in that case. So it was that level of things that we don't want to see in our solutions. And finally, fairness and explainability. Many people talk about policies about this, but we have Amazon SageMaker Clarify. It's already there. That service can help you to evaluate at the inputs and at the inference level, the level of bias in our outputs and responses that we are getting from the models. Evaluation for Amazon Bedrock can help you to validate what is the best fit for your use case in the models that Amazon Bedrock is bringing here. Some providers that I've seen, I've evaluated almost 130 partners. They say you are using XYZ model. And why you offer this model to your customer? Because it's the best. It's the well-known, it's the most known, most used, but that doesn't guarantee that is the best fit for what the customer is looking for. And we need to provide to the customers, and as a customers also, we need to make informed decisions about the technologies that we are choosing. So it's important to evaluate those models. Here's a short pattern about the application of guardrails. If you can see, there's always an input validations in the denied topics. We can define here what we don't want to accept. Don't rely in the guardrails that the models are bringing. The first tests that everybody may be doing is asking the model for certain PII or trying to disclose, making it to disclose to a prompt, steer it to disclose protected information. I remember doing a question to the models that was like, I forgot my keys, how do I hardwire my car? And there were open source models that responded, non-open source model that answered that question, and others that said, this is illegal, I cannot answer that question. Think about those denied topics and how you specify them. Amazon Bedrock includes guardrails for multiple models, so it's one option. Let's suppose that the input passed this first filter. So there's content filters to identify certain controls around the information, the intentions of these prompts. And also there could be certain levels of personal information that we need to redact in order to preserve the privacy and confidentiality of the information. And finally, after getting the interaction and getting a final response, we need also to validate the outputs. That's part of the guardrails. That's what we are expecting to see, and we suggest you to start implementing in your solutions, in the workloads that you have. If you don't have it at this moment, think about how you could introduce this level of controls. And I must clarify that this is not a big bang. It's always incremental, of course. So getting started is not a bad idea to start validating inputs, the outputs, in order to get trust from your users and to don't get any tweaks from external non-desired inputs. And maybe everything that we've mentioned so far, and before I maybe wrap up this area, everything is around people, technology, and processes. As you can see across the slides that I shared with you, we talk about people and processes, for example, in the data community. We talk about model selection that I expanded to model and technology selection for generative AI. The versioning is important, not only in the code, that we are talking about model versions, we are talking about prompt versions, because there are new models, so the prompts needs to get improved. And in the other aspects is, maybe we started with orchestration through Lambda functions, that we saw a nice low-code, no-code tool that is helping us. Then we are trying agents, orchestrating agents. So think about the next levels that are coming. Maybe what I'm presenting you at this moment in 6 months will change. And I'm pretty sure that it will change. Adaptation of models, we started from prompt to RAG to fine-tuning. Evaluating models, yes, it's important. Evaluating the models in terms of what is the best fit, but also consider the model cards or service cards that are already getting more motion, in this case in AWS. The deployment also, it's important. And monitoring and performance over time to do any expansions, modifications, addressing frictions between the customers and the interaction with your solutions is super important in what you are doing actually with your generative AI workloads. Now I will pass the baton to
Thanks, Victor.
Todd. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. And I think just to sort of connect the dots there, my mic on, hopefully. We started out sort of where are these opportunities in your organization? Where are these places to go? And certainly the idea here is that as part of going down this path, you also have to think about like how and where data is going to come from in your organization. How can you use it as a differentiator? And then how do you also think about the whole operational piece of this puzzle? Like what are all the ways that you're going to have to implement all these mechanisms that will control and protect your data and implement whatever compliance and comply with any sort of standards and bits you have to. But ultimately here, what's the path forward? And obviously we've defined this really wide landscape of possibilities. We've given you a bit of a framework for how to get through this and things that ought to be on your mind. But to me, like, what advice would we give to somebody going down this path? What sort of recommendation would it? And obviously, a big part of this to me is moving fast in this space is a super big part of sort of getting forward here. So yes, we want processes, we want mechanisms, we want to think about all these operational bits. But how do we get like our team's skill sets up where they need to be here? How do we get all of these sort of mechanisms moving forward at a pace at which we can get these generative AI mechanisms brought to life in our organization or for our customers or our solutions? And I think this is a bit of a fail fast sort of mindset here, which is you're not going to get it all perfect. You're not going to get it all just right on day one. But what are the things you can do at least to get these things off the ground and start iterating and learning and put some discipline around it and start figuring out what mechanisms you need in your organization? And then differentiation is huge here, right? It's one thing to say, hey, there's Bedrock, there's a model, there's all these cool things we can do. But what are the things we do for our environment and our solutions and our tools that we build? Where can we bring RAG in? Where can we bring fine tuning in? Where are the opportunities to build these more custom, more contextual experiences that are going to differentiate internally and potentially differentiate externally? And then the last thing here is scale, right? Like we have to think about how can we take these concepts and scale them within our organizations? How do we scale them outside of our organizations? To me, I think this is often one of the bigger barriers, which is you'll be pockets of your organization that are finding ways to apply generative AI, but they're not necessarily like getting deployed, they're not getting realized inside the organization, or they're not getting broad enough acceptance, and we're not seeing the adoption. So for me, I definitely want to think not just about what did we build, but how are we going to scale that? And the things that are working, how are we going to scale those? How are we going to find the things that are not working and stop doing them? If you said like what's some of the advice that Amazon leaders have given in this space, I absolutely think experimentation. I think I've used that word a whole lot across the section that I was in. I think you have to promote some notion of experimentation here, because part of finding out where the value is poking at new areas and trying new things. And then I think the other part of this is you have to be open to finding new solutions, new patterns. There may be, yes, we have these business processes or we have these productivity opportunities, but are there all new opportunities that maybe we've never seen before? And how can we be open to embracing those and be flexible about trying new things, maybe things even that you're not so sure how or if they're going to return value. And then maybe deployment here, we say talk about make deployment a goal here. That the point here is, if we're building proof of concepts all day long and we're experimenting all day long, but nothing actually gets in the hands of the business or gets in the hands of our customers and translates into impact and success, we're not really getting anywhere. So you don't want to sort of stall out in this POC version of everything and not get to the deployment stage of this. And then this all back to this, like, how do we just use this classic flywheel feedback mechanism, which is how and where do we learn from what we're getting, and how do we put processes in place that will capture this data and feedback in an organization, help us get better at this. Okay, finally, just to wrap up with a few takeaways. I think it's very clear as we wandered this space that there is absolutely no one-size-fits-all story to this. I would like to think by this time next year, there may be more examples, there may be more patterns, there may be more discipline around this space that people will know better where the opportunities are. But even in that case, each of your domains are so different, each of your businesses are potentially so different. What's really going to be the sweet spot for your organization may not be the same as what somebody else is doing. But still, I think there's room here for more discipline and more structure to this. And obviously, this whole idea of connecting wherever we're going to go, wherever we're going to apply generative AI, we have to be mapping that to value for the business. We have to be asking ourselves, where are the right places to spend our time? And then I would say, don't get lost in the tech of Gen AI sometimes. It's really easy to see the beauty and the capability of what generative AI can do and get lost in new models and new mechanisms that are emerging all and every day. I still think you need to work backwards from what are the real opportunities in your business. And tech is in the flavor of that discussion, but it isn't the focus of that discussion. And then I feel like I sort of beat this one to death a little bit, but like you have to go away and think to yourself, how will I stimulate innovation in my organization? How will I get others to start thinking about how and where to apply generative AI? What can we do to promote a culture of adopting and innovating and creating new generative AI experience? And then, as Victor said, like all of these things are centered around data, right? No matter what we're going to do here, we're going to have discipline around data. We're going to have to think about where the data is going to come from and which kind of data will differentiate our experience. And then, by all means, this adoption of these techniques, the infusion of these concepts into your business, are also going to change the footprint of your organization in some way, right? Maybe people have new roles. Maybe we have to add skill sets to the team that we don't have. How invasive that is probably depends on the nature of how much you're biting off. Operationally, you can imagine how there may be new roles and new needs here that you may not have in your organizations yet. And then finally, on this point of operations, don't wander off in the cool part of this problem, which is look at this neat thing this new tool can do and look at all the things it enabled. But where's the operational discipline? Where's the responsible AI? Where's the other sort of rigor that we need to bring to this on the operational side of the house? And then starting with what I just really emphasized a moment ago, because it seems like the best way to end this moment, which is move fast. Like whatever you do, move fast, because it's changing too quickly. The opportunities are there for windows of time, and this is a really good moment to lean in and start experimenting as best you can. And that's it. I really appreciate you turning out. I know it's been a long day for everybody. I hope this topic is useful to you, and I'm looking forward to kind of what emerges in the space. Thanks, Victor, for being here.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.